अर्थव्यवस्था में कर रही है।
एमसीडी का स्कूल दुनिया के टॉप 10 में आया है।
भगवंत मान जी के नेतृत्व में एक बेहतरीन, अच्छी और जनहित में काम करने वाली सरकार चल रही है।
मैं मानती हूँ ये वेरी वैलिड मुद्दे हैं।
कौन थे वो लोग जो फार्म लॉस के खिलाफ मुहिम छेड़ी थी राज्यसभा के अंदर?
कहीं ना कहीं कांग्रेस में असुरक्षा की भावना लीडरशिप में।
0 + 0 + 0 303 का आंकड़ा पार नहीं करता।
There are so many problems created on this.
If there's a vacuum, somebody will step in, whether it be the judiciary or the executive or the legislature.
The Supreme Court is an extremely respected institution.
किसी भी समुदाय के साथ किसी भी स्तर पर कोई भेदभाव नहीं।
छद्म राष्ट्रवाद वो है कि हम राष्ट्रवाद का नाम लेकर के सत्ता तक पहुंचना चाहते हैं।
हम कैसे इस अवसर को उपयोग करके एक ट्रैवल टूरिज्म डेस्टिनेशन बने।
I mean, our services exports are doing exceptionally well.
हम इस वक्त मौजूद है डूरू अनंतनाग में।
और 5-6 किलोमीटर जाना पड़ता था फोन चार्ज लगाने के लिए, पूरा दिन ज़ाया हो जाता था।
तो ये नया कश्मीर है जहाँ पे 75 साल के बाद आज बिजली रेस्टोर की गई।
75 साल के बाद हमने आज पहली बार पावर देखी, ऐसे पहले हमको पावर नहीं थी।
बहुत खुशी हुई क्योंकि पहली बार हमने बिजली देखी है।
हम इस सरकार को मुबारक देते हैं जिन्होंने हमें बिजली फराहम की।
माशाल्लाह बहुत खुशी है।
Today we are going to be taking a look at women in the workplace. I've been looking at data and statistics. They are saying the number of women in higher education is more than the number who actually join the workforce and actually stay in the workforce.
The reason why we sort of set up Vedika and it is where it is really is a response to what we saw as a problem. And I think, Priya, I see it at 4 levels, especially with respect to the workforce. There is a problem of access in the first place. Then there is access to retention. Then there is access, limited access to opportunity, and therefore limited access to growth.
Which is what shows like this are for, to create an awareness. And I want to take that point, the hashtag don't quit.
I think the problem is at the social level, at the family level, personal level, and obviously the organizational level. And we need to, like she said, chip away at all these challenges.
So the biases, you must be having a lot of cases that come to you. What are the prejudices and biases that women face at workplaces?
Women tend to be, because of so many issues, family planning, there's children, so it's not a continuous haul, they get interrupted.
What we women want at these times on NewsX. Co-powered by Goldie Kitchen King Masala. Goldie Masale, jahan jaye rishte banaye. Associate sponsor Titan I+, Greenland Laminate and Kalyan Jewelers.
Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I am Rishabh Gulati. There was a time in the middle part of the last century when 2 great events took place in the continent of Asia that would redefine its future. In August of 1947, India got its independence. 2 years later, there was the Communist Revolution in China. 2 nations reborn at roughly the same time took 2 totally different paths. One of autocracy, communism, a dictatorship that chose to not give its people a say in governance, and one that despite the trials and tribulation of being a famine-struck country, stuck by it. And here we are 80 years later, examining a clash of worldviews. The Chinese people are, as we speak, undergoing something of a monstrous proportion that seems to be punishment upon punishment inflicted upon them, no different than what happens in North Korea, no different than what has happened in past autocratic regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, as we stand, the reports emerging out of China are now suggesting that the active COVID rate is about to hit 1 billion. Yes, let us try to digest that figure. That there are currently 1 billion or nearabouts people who are sick or falling sick in China over a COVID infection which began from that country, was brutally oppressed or used as a tool of oppression within that country. And you can see this in marked contrast to what is happening in India and other parts of the world. We don't even have a full picture. These are best guesses, best estimates to what the travails of living in China right now must feel like. It's unbelievable what is going on. When we began this journey, when we were lied to, we were duped, we were harassed into succumbing to converting a Chinese-born virus out of Wuhan. Who created it, we don't still know. But we were forced into the depths of hell dealing with for 2 years. We were told that the Chinese system was best suited to deal with an emergency and a crisis. We have now proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the Chinese system has been the worst suited to deal with an emergency and a crisis. Despite spying, despite stealing data, despite having the advantage of a 4-5 month head start, their science, their ability to develop treatment, to develop and deliver a safe and effective vaccine, to develop and deliver safe and effective administration, has been left in the dumps. In this country, in a free democracy with all its complications, we have not only developed the vaccine, delivered it, moved on from it, provided it to the world, fed its people, not had any socio-economic problems, and are growing at the fastest economic rate in the world. Now, when I was a student in school, a book was published by an American philosopher and author and political scientist called Francis Fukuyama. He called it The End of History, when he suggested that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world had accepted in certain values in which human society should progress. He was wrong at that point of time because the Chinese example stood out like a sore thumb. And now the Chinese example has been busted. Socialism with Chinese characteristics doesn't work because it delivers people eventually like a Xi Jinping who bring the system down to tatters. Let's open up this conversation on the broadcast with me. We have Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. We also have Dr. PSV Rao, Dr. Sanjeev Bagai is sitting with us, as is Gautam Mukherjee. Dr. Rao, let me begin with you now because I have no way to verify these facts, no way to, other than make an educated guess at the reports. But when the reports are suggesting that 900 million COVID cases and counting, 900 million COVID cases and counting, do we take this with a pinch of salt? Is it also all just random propaganda far removed from reality? Or is it probably actually that bad?
Good afternoon, Rishabh, and to all the panelists and viewers. It may be one extreme, and what figures are coming from China are obviously the other extreme. Somewhere in between must be the correct figures. Now, China refuses to reveal even to its own puppet, the WHO, any figures. And you know very well that it is very opaque. no true figures are going to come out of China. And the figures that have been put out by BBC and Western sources may be a bit exaggerated. So the only way we are going to ever know is when finally this whole episode is over and hopefully communist China has become more open society than what it is. So we have to go by the video evidence. Also, I think we should check out the OSNIT, the open source intelligence which is available, to see exactly how much could be the incidence. But
even if it's half true, sir, even if it's half true, okay, even if it's an exaggeration, it's half true would suggest 500 million people who are sick. I mean the numbers are unimaginably mind-boggling. Okay,
it is huge.
What is that just taught us of what the system in China has been doing for the past 2.5 years?
See, in a communist or any kind of autocratic system, the rulers are not answerable to the population. They are going to only do things which suits them, to out of their own greed and out of their own feeling of sense of importance. So they are not going to bother about what is happening to the population. And their ego is what matters most. Their greed is what matters most. And when zero COVID it didn't work, Xi continued with it. Obviously, for one, to show that the Chinese system is better than the rest of the world, which has now blown back on him. Secondly, to try and suppress any kind of dissent. So the zero COVID was tried and given up by island countries like Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia. And when they found it didn't work, they gave up. But they are democracies. They are answerable to their public. In China, it's an autocracy and a single party system.
Well, democracies also have their own problems, because I don't know when the history of this will be written. Perhaps, Dr. Bagai or you yourself, Dr. Rao, would one day write it from what is available information. But when the history of this will be written, it will be patently obvious that whatever happened in Wuhan, at least in part, if not in whole, was funded by the American taxpayer, and the people who were channeling that funding have not faced any consequences because of democratic politics as well. So democracies have their problems, no doubt about it. But when it comes to the alternative, which you've just witnessed in China, well, thank God you're living here and not living there. Dr. Bagai is with us. Dr. Bagai, how do we process this? Because we've become used to processing unimaginable things in the past 2.5 years. But here we are. I mean, these are numbers and scales which are not registering, and which honestly we are not seeing in India. I was having an edit meeting in the morning, and my Bombay correspondent said that though there's a massive COVID wave in Mumbai. So I said, there's a COVID wave in Mumbai. What is that? So they said there are 9 cases that have been reported yesterday. Now I'm sure there are many more which are going unreported, but it's certainly not 900 million, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So let's take it as an entire concept. I think when the archive of the obituary of COVID is written, there will be a second tombstone, hopefully very soon, alongside with SARS-CoV-2, and the second tombstone will be of China. I think they have been unequivocally been described as really the bad and the evil boy of the world. I will mention in bullet points 6 startling mistakes which China has done on the world. 1, propagated the infection, concealed the data. 2, extremely poor vaccines hoodwinked WHO to push it globally. 3, extremely poor vaccine coverage within its society. 4, no investigation being allowed either by WHO or any other international body as a fair and neutral, unbiased investigation. 5, they have continued to conceal the data. They have now even forced the doctors in China not to mention COVID-related deaths. They will be mentioned as deaths because of other causes. 6, they have stopped genomic sequencing. So we don't know what's coming out of China. 96% of airline sewage contains SARS-CoV-2. In the recent week, 23% of one-flight passengers into Italy were carrying SARS-CoV-2. What is China growing at the present moment? BA 2.75, BQ 1.1, and XBB 1.5. Terrible 3. This triad is the worst possible in the Omicron lineage. We know that it is rampaging there, whether it be 1 million, 1 billion. These are figure of speech because we cannot trust them. In the end, what I would like to say is China is the most untrustworthy and irresponsible state the world has ever known. And I think we need to be extremely cautious going forward. India is still in a very safe position because of the excellent vaccine coverage. There is no point in now vaccinating the Chinese population because the vaccines given now are of the old strain.
Yeah.
To develop that kind of herd immunity, they should have woken up when India was marching forward to perhaps one of the best vaccine drives the world has seen.
It's unbelievable. Ambassador Mukherjee, this is, it's set jocularly under the concept of Murphy's Law that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. But here, everything from day one has exposed the system which perceived and propagated itself as being far more efficient and effective administratively when it came to taking on large challenges like this.
But absolutely, Rishabh, I still recall that when we were going through the Delta wave, how the Chinese media were making fun of us and giving shots of people having, I think, terrace parties and talking about the fact that there were barely, I think, they used to say there were 20 cases a day in the whole of China. And I used to always wonder that being a neighboring country, what have they given to their population to make them completely immune to coronavirus? All this actually demonstrates, and I'm glad you began with end of history. All this actually demonstrates that it's the end of the big sham. I agree with Dr. Bagai that there should be two arbitrary stones because the present crisis has shown, number one, that the Chinese vaccine was totally ineffective. Their policy of only giving it to their soldiers and to people who work in factories and neglect the large chunks of their population was heartless and foolish. And finally, their decision to reverse under public pressure the zero COVID policy in this manner and almost to fling the virus from China to the rest of the world in a kind of a gesture to say that, well, here it comes once again, this time not from Wuhan, but from the whole of China. Enjoy our virus. This is a new one. These are mutations. Let's see how you handle it. Again, it's very foolish because, as you rightly pointed out, and as Dr. Rao said, it doesn't matter whether it's 900 million, 1 billion. If they're saying 900 million and the Chinese are not giving figures, I presume that the distinguished medical practitioners on the panel would agree with me that we could say it is at least 400 million. So if it is 400 million, that's still a huge, humongous number for a country that is now buying Indian fake medicines on the black market out of desperation. They don't have enough medicines. They have stopped talking about how many new hospitals they are building for their patients, which they did in the early days of COVID, I remember. Field hospitals, etc. They have completely stopped talking about how they are handling coronavirus. And the only thing, information we are getting is from social media, which means that it's a huge failure as compared to India, as compared to the country that they love to ridicule and say that we are incompetent, we are inefficient.
Okay, so I have to ask you, ma'am, and it might still be premature, but I keep wondering, is this then the beginning of the end of socialism with Chinese characteristics?
Socialism with Chinese characteristics was basically capitalism, economic capitalism without political freedom, given to a huge population on the premise, don't ask for political freedom, we'll give you a much better life. That has collapsed because the much better life has gone away. So when such a thing happens, Rishabh, since you are like me, a student of history and political science, what happens is that people then demand their political freedom, because with the political freedoms, they then have the hope of making a better life for themselves. So yes, it is not only the end of Chinese socialism as we understand it. I think that it is the end very soon of Xi Jinping, because I don't see him handling, if this 400 million or 500 million spin out of control, how are they going to handle it? At some point of time.
Well, I'm assuming, ma'am, that the next thing it will have to be done is at the point of a gun, and I think we are rapidly approaching that time. Gautam Mukherjee, one can easily argue that you can't write off the Chinese system, but there were other systems which once poked collapsed very, very rapidly, and that was the Soviet Union being an example. That once the one card fell, the house of cards completely collapsed within months. So there have been plenty of examples in global history of systems that do suddenly and in an unpleasant manner collapse very fast.
Yeah, Rishabh, what you've got here is a typical example of communist statistics. This is what used to happen in the USSR. You were given glorious results from each 5-year plan, so much so that India was so enamored it adopted the same system with socialism in place of communism. And so some news did get out. And in China, we already know that their debt burden is unsustainable, that their minimum growth rate requires to be 8% in order to feed their people. They don't grow a lot of their food, they bring it in. They bring all their oil in. They don't have even enough coal. Their people are no longer getting jobs. The good life is gone. And now there are billions of people getting COVID because of faulty vaccines, faulty vaccine administration, and now a cover-up. So where this goes, there are two countries who've been plaguing us. One is China and the other is Pakistan. They both are in dire straits hoisted on their own petards by their own actions. But how long it takes for the process to collapse, whether the Communist Party will collapse when they have managed to etiolate any form of political activity for so long. There's some going on in Hong Kong and they've stamped on it as hard as they could. It remains to be seen. It's hard to predict.
Okay, but Gautam Mukherjee, so what's the point of collapse? So what is the point of collapse? I mean, if history teaches us one thing, was that the Soviet Union did not run short of an army, it didn't run short of nuclear weapons. Its economy just imploded. It disappeared. And when in order to correct the system, changes were made, the system just fell apart within years, if not months. So it was not great power collapse, it was internal rot. The Americans, you can argue, outspent them and bankrupted them. Now the Chinese economy is where the real problem lies. Eventually people will get sick, people will recover, percentage will die. Hopefully it won't be more than 1% or 2%, we don't know. We'll never know how many died in China. But the question is the economic rot, because when they say they're growing at 2.7% or 2.3%, that's also a lie. They're probably in recession.
Yeah, none of this is edifying because all of it is opaque. We don't know. They feed us this and they feed us that. Estimates are made from the outside. It's interesting that a BBC report, BBC is renowned for its left-wing policies when it comes to news reporting. They're the ones saying that there are 900 million people ill and 1 million dead. So it's starting to be unconvincing even to those who are pro-China.
Okay.
Rishabh.
Okay. Let me get Dr. Rao into this conversation. Dr. Rao, then what is the comparative difference? I have to ask you this. that here we are, now we're in the middle of January. This has been going on in China for the past just over a month, I would say month and a half, since the beginning of December. I don't want to presuppose anything because who knows what happens next week or the week after that, okay? But we know that these very similar variants are also doing the rounds in India. They have been identified here, but not in large numbers. How are we not having so many cases?
Rishabh, before that, I will just add one point to what Mr. Gautam Mukherjee said. See, health is wealth. So if your health is gone, the wealth is also gone. And that will eventually lead to the breakdown of both our neighbors because they are in dire consequences now. Okay, coming to your question. See, we do have various variants. The big difference is that we have developed a hybrid immunity. We are also equally big nation like China. Our population has been exposed either to an excellent set of vaccines or to the virus itself. It is better that you get exposed to a mild variant of the virus and get immunity rather than be exposed to the deadly variant of the virus. So if you keep having extended lockdowns like China had, and there is no proper vaccination, so you would neither have immunity due to vaccination, nor due to the lockdown you are exposed to the mild variety of the virus. So when the deadly virus variant comes around, you have a real problem. Now looking at how previous pandemics of influenza and coronavirus, the SARS virus played out, you normally get a small first wave, then the biggest huge second wave, and then a smaller third wave, and it slowly becomes endemic or it gets eliminated. I mean, it becomes extinct. But there was a episode, it was a H1N1 virus, where there was a big fourth wave because the third wave, which was mild, didn't expose enough number of people. So that possibility exists, one. So there could be a possibility that China may will have this as their biggest wave. But India may not have that.
So let's not kid ourselves. Globally, in the US, in Japan, in Korea, in many places, and I'm sure the cases in India have also gone up, but they are so mild that people are passing it off like a flu, and it's not getting reported. So I don't want to assume that there are no cases. Only 9 cases in Bombay, for example. There might be a lot more, but it is palpably not a crisis. We are not seeing a crisis. We've been discussing this for 3 weeks. So Dr. Bagai, in the history now of what lessons are learned for future pandemics, we have now seen a country that it is almost apparent as per policy realized that something is going wrong. They knew months in advance, and they said if we are going to go down, we want to take the world down with us. They seem to be trying to do the same thing the other time, but this time the world is not being taken down with them. What is different?
Rishabh, just a couple of important points. One is just to add what Dr. Rao mentioned. The level of immunity and the way we have approached our vaccine program have given us very good herd immunity. Just 15 seconds on this part first. We started with the vulnerable first, the elderly first, above 65 first. Then went downwards. We didn't go the other way in which China tried. Point number 2, our lockdown was very strategic, very limited, very metered. It was primarily to get over the initial programming phase before we unlocked. During the unlocking, it was gradual, and we've developed not only herd immunity because of vaccines or mild or severe natural infections, but also cross infections from a host of other viral infections vis-a-vis, let's say, simple influenza. Now, coming to what China is, I think China is entering Titanic 2. It's only a question of time before this is going to overwhelm not only the health system, but political and social system. And let me explain very quickly why. People are forgetting that the R0 of now, what we are talking of, XBB 1.5, is reaching 18. That means one human being can infect mild, moderate, or severe 18 more people with each contact. and then it's a binary fission. If we are talking in terms of 1 billion, this can become many billion very soon. The after effects of this, the aftermath of this is huge. The amount of cardiac, pulmonary, strokes, sudden cardiac effects, and thromboembolic phenomena and other kind of diseases which are going to overrun the system, no country in the world can manage such a deluge of cases. It's now a matter of time in which people are going to revolt to throw this evil regime out. And I'm sure there will be many good countries which will just give a small little nudge for Xi Jinping to go down the cliff.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it with the broad questions with the ambassador and Gautam ji. Ambassador Mukherjee, we've seen a seminal moment on the global stage in the past 2 years, in which we've had to deal with the challenge, which ideally should have been dealt with together, minus the fact that we had one originating outlier who thought they had a better way of dealing with the system. 30 years ago, ma'am, a system collapsed. Are we in historical times?
It would appear so because, as you rightly pointed out, the Soviet Union collapsed primarily because of the economy, but also because ideologically, politically, ideologically, it no longer had the moorings to hold it together. Now, if you look at China today, you would see that apart from the economy, which was actually the main reason why this regime succeeded by telling the Chinese people, we'll give you a better life, don't ask for political freedom, that is collapsing. But in addition, I would agree with our medical practitioners that if there is a humongous health crisis, the way it's been described here, which will overwhelm the Chinese system, then how on earth can this regime survive? It is not possible for the regime to survive. It will go down. And when it will go down, I hope that the new system that will emerge will be based on some kind of democratic freedom, which would make it a better China for its own people, and which would also make it much easier for its neighbors, including India, to deal with China.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this of course merits a much longer conversation, but I'm going to ask it in a question to Gautam Mukherjee. Gautam Mukherjee, if it does go down, and I know it's a big if, okay, certainly bad to happen, but for the people of China, for them to figure out what they want with their futures. But if it were to go down, our nearest and only other example at this scale in the last 30 years was the collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to a political and geographical fragmentation as well. Now, we do know that the Chinese are colonizers. They are ruling through occupation Tibet and Inner Mongolia and many other places like East Turkestan and others. If it were to collapse, would that actually be a good thing, or would the world suffer because there would be economic consequences? It is the second largest economy, and then we will all have to face some of the headwinds.
Well, one of the things that needs to happen for a collapse to come about quite quickly is more and more withdrawal of support for the supply chains, for trade with China from the West. It is happening on a more aggressive basis of late. But if that were to happen, then their mainstay on how they carry on will go. If the Communist Party goes, it is quite probable that the China as we know it will be restricted within the Great Wall of China in due course, i.e. a Han China, and the rest of it will go their separate ways. They've been under the lash for a very long time, particularly Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang. Tibet doesn't have the population to do it, but Tibet may gain its freedom because the rest of it is collapsing. But you need to give it the nudge. We were talking of the nudge, the push from elsewhere. It has to come from all its trading partners, the ones that can keep this going, like Pakistan is somehow kept going, with little injections of support from here and there. that makes it difficult with the autocratic regime, because that's all they need. They'll keep on, and then they have their military to squash their own people, even though they can't seem to.
Yeah. So eventually, the next symptom would be when the guns come out. Okay, because that's the death throes. Now, I'm going to leave it here on two premises. This is an open-ended conversation, and certainly not the last conversation I'm having on television on it. But the lessons of the past, what happens with Iron Curtains, is that you don't know how hollow the structure is behind it. So we don't know right now in the Chinese Iron Curtain of total information management of what the real situation is. We are assuming it's pretty bad because it looks pretty bad. But I can perhaps end it on this note. In my lifetime, the one thing that mattered was the pace of growth of the Chinese economy. In my lifetime, it has never been this low. And that is not accounting for what has currently just been happening over the last 2 months. So if China was already in a recession, and this is going to make it much worse over the next few months, it's not been seen in 30 years. There is no succession plan, there is no government that can be voted out of power, and there is no obvious replacement for Xi Jinping. So if he goes, or if he does go, there's no one obvious person to take over, so the system might go with him. These seem unimaginable questions, and they would have been, but we have seen these things happen in the past. The Roman Empire did collapse. The British Empire did collapse. In fact, when it collapsed very rapidly. In 1945, the Second World War comes to an end. Within 3 months, Churchill is gone. Attlee becomes Prime Minister, and he says we're leaving India within a year. So when the end comes rapidly fast, and that's the only lesson of history. We don't know, but it's a staggering conversation across various subjects that needs to be had if it were to happen.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.